Today, I will tell you a story that began at Thanksgiving, when one question at a glittering family table changed everything. At Thanksgiving, my billionaire daughter's family seated me at the head table, as though I were a queen among strangers. Rachel leaned close, her voice carrying across the room, and asked, "Mom, aren't you enjoying your $7,000 a month allowance?" My hands shook. I whispered instead, "I am working 50 hours a week at 3 jobs." The laughter stopped. Forks froze in midair, and when I revealed it, the truth silenced everyone and shattered her smile. If you want to hear more stories of dignity, resilience, and the quiet strength of grandmothers, remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Join our Grandma Life Stories community, where the smallest voices often speak the loudest truths. My name is Catherine Miller. I am 68 years old, and every morning begins the same way. I boil water in my old kettle, the faint whistle rising like a familiar hymn. I pour the steaming water over Earl Grey leaves, watch the amber color bloom, and take that first sip that warms the hollow corners of my chest. Then I open my leather-bound journal, the one Thomas gave me for our 35th anniversary. Its edges are worn, its pages stained with ink and tears. Yet each morning I still write. Just a few lines. Sometimes a memory, sometimes a reminder to myself that I am still here, still holding the threads of my life. When the tea is finished, I step out into the yard. The air in Austin carries a different scent depending on the season. That morning it was the earthy perfume of damp soil after rain, heavy yet clean. My garden of roses, some planted decades ago, still demands my attention. I bend to pull weeds, trim the stems, whisper small encouragements under my breath as though Thomas might hear. Gardening is not simply routine, it is communion with the man I lost. And always, always, I carry his silver brooch. It is shaped like a rosebud, a promise he made on our wedding day that love, even in silence, would continue to bloom. I keep it tucked in the pocket of my cardigan. Whenever the world feels unsteady, my fingers find it. Cold metal warms against my skin, and I remember I am not alone. That particular morning, as I brushed dirt from my hands and wiped sweat from my brow, the phone rang. Rachel, my daughter. Her voice was smooth as glass, and I could hear laughter in the background, the clinking of preparations in a grand kitchen. "Mom," she said, "we've set the table for Thanksgiving dinner. Gregory and I have planned everything perfectly. We want you right there, seated at the head of the table. You'll love it. Everyone will be there. Everyone wants to see you." I paused, the phone pressed tightly to my ear. My cardigan, the same faded one I had worn for years, suddenly felt threadbare, its frayed cuffs an unkind reminder. My shoes by the door were scuffed, my nails stained from soil. For a moment, I thought of refusing. What business did I have in their marble halls, among their guests who dined on success and perfection? But Rachel's tone carried no room for refusal. "Mom, please, we've prepared everything. You must come." I whispered yes, though my heart was unsettled. As I hung up, my eyes drifted across the small living room, its worn couch, the photographs yellowed with time, the clock ticking steadily. It was my world, modest, honest, built on calloused hands and long nights. But now I was stepping into another stage, one dressed in chandeliers and curated appearances. I returned to my journal. On the fresh page, I wrote only one line. Sometimes the greatest battles begin with a smile. Then I closed the book, tucked the brooch safely in my cardigan, and sat by the window until the sun dipped behind the rooftops. The invitation to that Thanksgiving dinner was not simply a family gathering. It was the stage on which truth would be forced into the light, a truth I had carried in silence for too long. And though I did not know it yet, that night would test not only my patience, but also the promise Thomas had left in my keeping. I looked down at my hands, rough from scrubbing, from holding pens, from pruning thorns, hands that had never stopped working, hands that told the truth Rachel wanted hidden. I sighed, steadying myself. Tomorrow, at that gleaming table, I would be more than a guest. I would be the mirror they feared to look into. And so, dressed in my old cardigan, clutching my silver brooch, I prepared to walk into a mansion filled with light, carrying shadows that no chandelier could erase. I stepped into Gregory's house in Dallas, and for a moment I felt as though I had wandered into a palace that had borrowed its soul from a museum. The ceilings soared, hung with chandeliers that scattered light like broken glass. Oil paintings lined the walls, portraits of men who looked stern and powerful, women whose eyes followed you across the room. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and candle wax, layered with the heavier fragrance of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and nutmeg. A hush of voices echoed through marble halls that gleamed under my shoes. Gregory greeted me at the door. His suit was tailored to perfection, every line crisp. He smiled broadly, the smile of a man who enjoyed being watched. "Catherine," he said, kissing the air near my cheek, "you look radiant tonight." I felt the edge of his words. They were polite but hollow. Behind him, Rachel approached, her silk dress whispering as she moved, her hair arranged with painful precision. She kissed my cheek lightly, then stepped back to examine me as if I were part of the decor. The dining room stretched before me like a stage set for a performance. A mahogany table ran the length of the room, long enough to host 20 guests, each seat already filled with faces glowing in the chandelier light. Silverware gleamed, crystal glasses sparkled, and in the center of the table a golden turkey steamed beside bowls of glazed carrots and whipped potatoes. I was guided toward the head of the table, and when I sat down, I felt every pair of eyes settle on me. Gregory raised his glass. "To family," he announced, "to tradition, to generosity." The guests clapped politely, their bracelets and watches glinting as they lifted their glasses. My hands rested in my lap, brushing against the silver brooch tucked inside my cardigan pocket. Its metal was cool, grounding me as I tried to breathe steadily. Conversations swelled. People laughed too loudly, praised the wine, spoke of vacations to the Amalfi Coast. I forced myself to smile, though each word around me felt foreign, as if spoken in a language I once knew but no longer belonged to. My stomach tightened. The smell of roasted meat mixed with clove made me dizzy. Then Rachel leaned toward me. She smiled wide, her voice just loud enough to ripple across the table. "Mom," she said, "aren't you enjoying your $7,000 a month allowance?" For a second, I thought I had misheard her. My fork slipped against the plate, making a small metallic scrape. The room erupted in approving laughter, as if her words were proof of a kindness so extraordinary it deserved applause. Guests nodded, some even whispering, "What a devoted daughter." Heat rushed to my face. My chest tightened as if a band had been pulled around it. I looked at Rachel. Her eyes sparkled with pride, or perhaps calculation. Gregory leaned back, smug satisfaction softening his mouth. I felt the weight of the brooch against my fingers. Thomas's voice whispered through memory, "Hold your truth, Kate. Do not let silence chain you." The smell of cinnamon candles thickened the air. My throat burned. I forced myself to lift my eyes and speak. "I'm working 50 hours a week at 3 jobs. The words fell like stones into a lake. The ripples spread instantly. Forks stopped moving. A spoon clinked against porcelain and froze midair. A man near the end of the table coughed into his napkin. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their chair. The laughter vanished as though it had been cut with a blade. Rachel's smile collapsed, her lips parting but no sound coming out. Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered her wineglass. Gregory's expression hardened, though he tried to mask it with a quick clearing of his throat. He glanced around the table as if searching for a way to recapture control. Silence pressed in on me. The guests stared, some with wide eyes, some with pity, some with suspicion. I felt a wave of shame threaten to rise, but I held tight to my brooch and pushed it back. Shame belonged to those who lied, not to me. Rachel finally spoke, her voice tight. "Mom," she whispered through clenched teeth, "why would you say that here?" I did not answer. I sat straight, feeling the cold of the silverware against my skin, smelling the wax melting from tall, white candles, hearing the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. The weight of truth hung in the air, undeniable. Gregory lifted his glass once more, attempting to force the evening back into its shape. "To honesty," he said with an uneasy smile. No one raised their glass. The toast died before it was born. In that stillness, I realized something. Truth does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, shattering illusions with a single sentence. That night, my truth had broken Rachel's smile, and nothing in that room would ever be the same again. The clinking of glasses still echoed faintly from the dining room when Rachel's hand closed around my arm. Her grip was tighter than her smile. She pulled me through the swinging door into the kitchen, away from the watchful eyes of the guests. The warm scent of roasted turkey was stronger here, mingled with garlic, butter, and the faint metallic smell of the industrial sink. Steam curled upward from pots left simmering, but the air was heavy with something colder than any draft. "Mom," she hissed, her face close to mine. "Why would you do that? Do you have any idea how humiliated I am? You made me look like a liar in front of everyone." Her voice cracked, but not from sorrow. It cracked from anger, from fear of cracks spreading through the porcelain mask she wore so carefully. I studied her, the daughter I once held when she was feverish, the girl who clung to me after nightmares. Now she was a woman in silk and jewels, trembling not from truth, but from the possibility of losing control. Before I could answer, Gregory entered. His footsteps were deliberate, the sound of polished shoes striking tile. He slipped his hands into his pockets and leaned casually against the counter, but his eyes were sharp. "Catherine," he said, his tone calm and almost tender, "we only want what is best for you. If you keep saying things like that, people will start to think you are confused, maybe even losing your memory." He let the words hang in the steam-filled air. A smile touched his lips, smooth as velvet, but underneath it was steel. I straightened my shoulders. My fingers pressed against the brooch hidden inside my cardigan. I let the coolness seep into my skin, steadying me. My voice came quiet but firm. "My memory may falter. I may forget where I left my keys. I may forget what day it is, but my bills do not lie." Rachel blinked. "Bills?" "Yes," I said, my voice gathering weight. "The electric bill that threatens disconnection if I am late one more month. The rent that eats nearly half of what I make scrubbing offices before dawn. The water bill that arrives with its blue paper, warning me of penalties. I work to cover them all. I do not live on $7,000 a month. I live on exhaustion." Gregory's eyes narrowed, though his smile remained. "No one needs to hear about those things, Catherine. They only drag people down. We protect you from that. We protect your image." I turned to him fully, my voice clear. "You are not protecting me. You are protecting yourselves." Rachel's cheeks flushed red. She glanced toward the door, afraid someone might overhear. She lowered her voice to a whisper that trembled with rage. "Why would you want to embarrass me? Why do you always resist me when I'm trying to care for you?" The words stung, not because they were true, but because she believed them. She believed her performance of care was real. "Care," I repeated softly. "Do you know what care looks like, Rachel? Care is bringing soup to a sick child. Care is staying awake through the night, rocking her until she sleeps. Care is telling her the truth, even when the truth is hard. Care is not fabricating allowances to impress strangers while your mother scrubs tables at midnight." Her lips quivered. She wanted to argue, but my words had sliced too close to the marrow. Gregory stepped in, his voice lowering into that practiced baritone. "You should rest, Catherine. That is what we want for you. Comfort. Dignity. If you continue to deny what we give you, people will question your health. They will start to wonder if you can take care of yourself." The implication slid in like a knife. If I kept resisting, they could declare me unfit, strip me of my independence, silence me altogether. I held his gaze. "Do not mistake my silence for weakness. I know exactly what I live on. I know exactly what I owe. I know the cost of every hour I scrub, every child I watch, every plate I carry at the diner. That is my truth, Gregory, and I will not let you bury it beneath your illusions." Rachel pressed her hands together tightly, nails digging into her palms. "Please," she whispered, "just stop. Tonight was supposed to be perfect." Perfect. That word, polished and hollow, clattered in my chest. I thought of my journal, pages filled with notes about bills, worries, and memories. I thought of my roses, their petals opening despite thorns. Perfect was an illusion. Real life was ink, soil, sweat, and truth. The kitchen door swung open for a moment, and laughter from the dining room spilled inside, thin and brittle. A guest called Rachel's name. She pasted on a smile, turned back to me, and whispered, "Do not ruin this family, Mom. Do not ruin me." I looked at her, my daughter, trembling on the edge of a facade she had built higher than she could climb down from. My heart ached with love still buried under layers of disappointment. But love did not erase truth. "I will not ruin you," I said quietly. But lies have a way of ruining themselves. Gregory's jaw tightened. Rachel stared, her eyes glossy, her breath uneven. Then she turned away, smoothing her dress as though fabric could erase the words. She stepped through the swinging door, back into the glow of chandeliers, back into her theater of perfection. Gregory lingered a moment longer. His voice softened again, but the softness was a mask. "Think carefully, Catherine. You are not as strong as you used to be. People will believe what they want to believe. Do not force us to make choices you will regret." I met his gaze, unwavering. "The only choice I regret," I said, "is staying silent too long." His eyes flickered, and for the first time that night, I saw something unsettled behind his composure. He turned and left. Alone in the kitchen, I pressed the silver brooch tightly. The cool metal seared into my palm, anchoring me. I inhaled the scent of roasted garlic and butter, listened to the muffled voices beyond the door, and felt the weight of truth settling more heavily on my shoulders. I knew then that this night had shifted everything. The world they built on polished lies had cracked, and though I stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the echoes of wealth and performance, I felt the quiet strength of something greater rising inside me. The bills waiting at home, the hours of labor, the loneliness, they were heavy burdens. But they were mine, honest and unadorned. The train ride back to Austin was long and silent. City lights blurred against the window as I pressed my forehead to the glass. My reflection looked pale, older than the 68 years etched into my bones. When I finally reached my small house, the quiet wrapped itself around me like a blanket too heavy to move beneath. I unlocked the door, the familiar creak greeting me. The air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender detergent. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited for the whistle. The water hissed as if it too carried unspoken words. When I poured it over the tea leaves, the steam rose, soft and fragrant. I cupped the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into me. Rain had passed earlier in the evening, and through the open window drifted the earthy scent of damp soil, rich and grounding. I carried the tea to my desk. The leather-bound journal waited, edges frayed, pages swelling from years of ink. I opened it slowly, the sound of paper turning as familiar as breath. My pen hovered before I wrote. Silence once sheltered me, but tonight silence would have betrayed me. My handwriting trembled. I paused, fingers brushing the silver brooch at my chest. Thomas's gift. His promise. Its metal was cool, steady. I let it remind me that my truth was not a burden, but an anchor. A knock at the door startled me. I set my pen down and opened it to find Linda Perez, my neighbor. She stood with a wicker basket wrapped in a checkered cloth, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun. "Evening, Kate," she said, her voice warm. "I baked sweet bread. Thought you might like some company." I stepped aside, and she entered. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled my small kitchen, mingling with the tea. She set the basket down and looked at me closely. "You've had one of those nights, haven't you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Thanksgiving dinner," I whispered. "It wasn't a dinner, it was a performance. And I ruined their show." Linda raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" I sat across from her, folding my hands. "Rachel told everyone she gives me $7,000 a month. Said it like she was announcing a prize. They all clapped, Linda. They looked at me as if I were spoiled, cared for, fortunate. But I told them the truth. I said I work 50 hours a week at 3 jobs just to pay the bills. Her eyes softened, but she did not interrupt. They pulled me into the kitchen after, I continued. Rachel said I embarrassed her. Gregory told me people would think I'm confused, losing my memory, as if my mind was the problem, not their lies. Linda shook her head slowly. That's cruel. They want to write your story for you, Kate. I let out a bitter laugh. That's what it felt like, as if my life, my struggle, could be erased with a single false sentence. She leaned forward, her hands gripping mine firmly. If you don't record the truth, they will. They'll write it in ledgers, in tax documents, in speeches at their parties. You must write your own. You must keep every detail, every word. Otherwise, your silence will become their weapon. Her words struck me harder than I expected. I had always written in my journal, memories, prayers, grief, but never as evidence, never as defense. I looked around my small kitchen, the cracked linoleum, the humming refrigerator. It was humble, but it was real. Each bill stacked neatly on the counter told my truth more honestly than Rachel ever would. The electric notice with its red warning stamp. The water bill folded and creased from being handled too many times. The rent receipt with my signature shaky from exhaustion. I met Linda's eyes. You're right. They already tried to twist my story once. If I don't hold on to it, they'll erase me completely. She smiled gently, sliding the basket closer to me. Then eat something and start writing. Every battle needs strength. The sweet bread was warm, soft under my fingers. I tore a piece, the sugar crust flaking. The taste reminded me of childhood, of mornings when my mother baked while the sun spilled through the curtains. It grounded me, reminding me that truth lived in small, tangible things, not in staged performances. After Linda left, I sat again at my desk. The lamp cast a circle of golden light. I gathered the bills from the counter, stacked them neatly beside the journal. I wrote each one down, the amount, the date, the hours I had worked to pay it. My pen pressed harder with each entry, carving the truth into paper. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping gently against the window. I listened to its rhythm, steady and relentless. It mirrored the pulse in my chest. I whispered to myself, they think silence will protect them, but silence will only betray me. The kettle whistled softly again, though I had not said it. For a moment, I imagined Thomas's presence lingering in the room. I touched the brooch. Its coldness was no longer harsh but bracing, like wind on a mountain peak. I felt the first spark of something I had not known in years, resolve. The dining room in Dallas had been gilded with lies. Here in my small home with damp soil breathing through the window and rain tapping the glass, I held the unpolished, undeniable truth. And I promised myself as I dipped the pen again that their voices would not erase mine. The email arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Rain tapped lightly on the window, steady and rhythmic, while I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea. The subject line read simply, "Documents for you to sign." My daughter's name glowed in bold letters beside it. I hesitated before clicking, a ripple of unease stirring through me. Rachel never sent me paperwork. When I opened the file, my breath caught. Pages of tax forms filled the screen, numbers and codes in neat rows. I scrolled slowly, eyes scanning for the places she had marked in yellow. Near the bottom of the second page, I froze. My name appeared, listed as a dependent. Beside it, the notation, allowance, $7,000 per month. My hand trembled so badly, I had to set the mouse down. For a moment, I thought perhaps I was reading it wrong, that my eyes were playing tricks. I leaned closer, squinting at the words. They remained steady, clear, undeniable. $7,000, my name attached to it. I whispered into the empty room, $7,000? Where? The bills on the counter stared back at me. The electric notice stamped in red, the water bill with its late fee, the rent receipt crumpled from being folded in my pocket on the way to the landlord. Each piece of paper was its own witness. I had worked 50 hours a week to keep these bills paid, to keep the lights on, the water running, a roof over my head. $7,000 a month had never touched my hands. I pressed the heel of my palm against my forehead, forcing myself to breathe. Then I reached for my phone. With quick, deliberate movements, I snapped pictures of the screen, every page, every line where my name appeared. I saved them carefully. Proof. Still, the question pounded in my chest. If the money wasn't coming to me, where had it gone? I closed the laptop and sat back, the chair creaking beneath me. The house was quiet, except for the faint buzz of the refrigerator. I felt small within it, as though the walls themselves leaned closer, pressing the weight of secrecy against me. My fingers sought the silver brooch pinned inside my cardigan. The metal was cool, unyielding. I clutched it tightly, letting its strength flow into me. Rachel's voice echoed in my memory, her whisper at the Thanksgiving table. "Mom, aren't you enjoying your $7,000 a month allowance?" I had thought it was a cruel flourish, a performance for her guests. Now I realized it was more than theater. It was a lie etched into official records, polished and dressed as truth. I rose from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, drops clinging to the glass like clear beads. The yard glistened, the soil dark and heavy. My roses bowed under the weight of water, petals trembling but still intact. They reminded me of myself, bent but not broken. I whispered to the window, "They've written me into their story without my consent," and the kettle whistled, shrill and insistent. I turned it off, poured another cup of tea, and sat back down. The steam rose, carrying the faint scent of bergamot. I inhaled deeply, steadying my breath. My phone buzzed. Another message from Rachel. "Just sign the highlighted sections and send them back. It's easier this way. Love you." I stared at the words. Easier for whom? Easier for her and Gregory, no doubt. Easier for the image they projected, the carefully crafted facade of generosity. Easier for the tax records they filed. Not easier for me. Not for the woman scrubbing desks at dawn, balancing trays at the diner, and minding restless toddlers on Saturdays. I typed slowly, deliberately. "I'll look them over. I need some time." Then I pressed send. The truth burned inside me. I could not confront them yet, not without knowing more. But this paper trail was no accident. It was design, and design always had intention. The rain stopped, and the quiet deepened. I gathered the bills from the counter, spread them beside the laptop, and compared. Each line item on the forms promised $7,000 a month. Each piece of paper in my hands demanded money I barely scraped together. The contrast was unbearable, yet undeniable. I closed the journal I had left open earlier and opened to a new page. In careful handwriting, I recorded what I had seen. The date, the document, the line that marked me as dependent, the allowance that never existed. I wrote the question again and again, as if repetition could summon an answer. If the money never reached me, where did it go? The words stared back, stark and uncompromising. I underlined them twice, then closed the journal. I sat still for a long time. The evening air cooled, carrying the scent of wet earth through the window. The room dimmed as the sun slipped lower. Shadows crept across the floor, merging with the quiet that pressed against me. I felt the edges of fear, sharp and cold, but beneath it a stronger current moved, resolve. They had built a story on my name. They had carved their generosity into paper while I bent my back to keep the lights on. That night at the Thanksgiving table had not been a slip of Rachel's tongue. It had been a practiced line, rehearsed and repeated, supported by documents that painted me as dependent, cared for, blessed. I pressed the brooch one more time and whispered to Thomas, "I won't let them erase me." The house was still, the silence heavier than before, but within it, a new thought took root. Lies could be dressed in silk and polished until they gleamed, yet paper and ink did not change reality, and if they thought I would remain silent, they had forgotten who raised Rachel, who taught her to speak, who taught her the power of words. I stood, gathered the bills, the printed copies of the forms, and placed them carefully in a folder. Evidence, not just of what they had done, but of who I was, a woman who worked, who paid her way, who refused to be written out of her own story. And as I turned off the light and walked toward my bedroom, one question followed me into the dark. Where did the money go? I walked 2 blocks under the heavy Texas sun, clutching the folder against my chest as if it were fragile glass. Inside were the printed pages Rachel had sent me, each one marked and highlighted. I had stared at them all night, circling the line where my name appeared as a dependent receiving $7,000 a month. Those papers felt like a weapon pointed directly at me. The small house I approached was familiar. Its shutters were faded green, and a wind chime clinked softly in the breeze. Ethan Carter lived there, Thomas's old friend, once a meticulous accountant, now retired. I had not visited him in years, but Thomas always trusted him, and I needed someone who spoke the language of numbers better than I ever could. I knocked gently. The door creaked open, and Ethan appeared. His hair was white, his glasses resting low on his nose. "Catherine," he said, surprised but warm. "It's been too long. Come in." The smell of coffee filled the air as I stepped inside. His living room was lined with shelves of thick binders and old tax manuals, dusted but carefully kept. A chessboard sat unfinished on the coffee table, pawns waiting mid-battle. I placed the folder down with shaking hands. "Ethan, I need your eyes on this." He adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and spread the papers across the table. His brow furrowed as he traced the lines with a practiced finger. The room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock and the shuffle of paper. My pulse thudded in my ears. Finally, he leaned back, sighing. "Kate," he said slowly, "this is serious. Your daughter listed you as a dependent, claiming she provides you with a $7,000 monthly allowance. If you never saw a penny of this, that's tax fraud." The word landed hard. Tax fraud. It seemed larger than the room, heavier than the air. I swallowed. "And what does it mean for me?" His eyes softened. "It means they're not only lying to the government, but also using your name to do it. And worse, it falls under elder financial abuse. They're exploiting your identity, Catherine, dressing it up as generosity while you carry the weight alone." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Elder financial abuse," I repeated. The phrase stung. "That's what I am to them. A tool, a line item." Ethan reached across the table, his hand steady on mine. "You are not powerless, but you must be careful. Don't confront them head on. Not yet." I looked at him sharply. "Why not? The truth is clear. Why should I stay quiet?" He shook his head. "Because without proof, it's your word against theirs. And they have money, lawyers, connections. You have to build a record, write everything down, keep copies of every email, every bill, every document. Sincerity isn't enough. Justice needs evidence." The words sank deep. They carried the weight of experience, of battles fought on paper and in courtrooms. I exhaled slowly, glancing at the pages again. The black ink seemed bolder now, the lie more poisonous. "So I gather everything," I said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Think of it like building a wall, one brick at a time. Keep a journal not just of your thoughts, but of dates, conversations, amounts. Save voicemails, record details. Memory fades, but paper does not. When the time comes, it will not be your voice alone. It will be the evidence speaking." I pressed the brooch at my chest, its metal warming under my hand. Thomas always told me silence could be mistaken for surrender. I have stayed silent too long. Ethan gave a faint smile. "Then let the silence end with this. But walk carefully. They will notice if you dig too openly." The clock ticked louder, or perhaps it was my heartbeat. I thought of Rachel's face at the dinner table, glowing with pride as she announced my supposed allowance. I thought of Gregory's voice in the kitchen, calm and threatening, suggesting people might believe I was losing my mind. And now these papers, cold, official, undeniable lies. I tightened my jaw. I won't confront them yet, but I won't let them bury me in silence either. I will keep everything. Ethan nodded. "That's the right path. Truth is powerful, but only when it is documented." I left his house as the afternoon sun began to fade. The air outside smelled faintly of cut grass, sharp and grounding. I walked home slowly, the folder pressed close. Each step felt heavier, but also more certain. When I reached my small home, I placed the folder on my desk beside the journal. I opened to a clean page and began writing. The ink flowed steadily, recording the date, the meeting, Ethan's words. Tax fraud, elder financial abuse. Do not confront them directly. Gather evidence. I underlined the last sentence. My hand was firm. I looked at the bills stacked neatly, at the emails saved in my phone, at the photos of the documents. Each piece was a shard of truth. Alone, they were fragile, but together, they could cut through lies. As night settled, I brewed another cup of tea. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of bergamot. I held it close, breathing it in. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that did not feel like defeat anymore. It felt like preparation. I whispered to the empty room. You tried to write my story without me, but I will hold the pen now. The brooch glinted faintly in the lamplight as I bent back over the journal, ready to record every step. The sun was sinking low when Rachel appeared at my door. The sky outside burned orange and violet, shadows stretching long across the street. She stood there with a bouquet of lilies, white and flawless, their fragrance spilling into my modest home, as though trying to cover the scent of old wood and simmering soup. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, almost rehearsed, "I only want people to think I'm a good daughter. I only want them to see I take care of you. Why would you fight me on this?" Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped inside. The sound was too sharp for my small kitchen, too polished for the cracked linoleum and chipped counters. She placed the flowers in a vase without asking, her hands moving quickly, nervously. The vase was the one Thomas and I had bought at a flea market 30 years ago, cheap glass, worn at the rim. Her lilies looked out of place in it, like actors in the wrong play. I studied her face. The careful makeup, the subtle shimmer at her cheekbones, the way her smile quivered but did not break. She wore perfection like armor. Yet perfection is brittle. It cracks under pressure, and I could see the faint lines already forming. I folded my hands around my mug of tea. The warmth seeped into my fingers, steadying me. My voice came slow, measured. "You are not fighting me, Rachel. You are fighting yourself. A mirror does not lie, no matter how much you smile into it." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock broke it. Rachel's eyes flickered, wide for just an instant, then narrowed. She turned away, adjusting the flowers again, though they needed no adjusting. Her perfume lingered in the air, rich and heavy, clashing with the homely scent of bread cooling on the counter. That perfume had cost more than my week's wages. I could almost taste the bitterness of it as it mingled with the simple air of my kitchen. She laughed lightly, though it trembled. "You always make things sound so dramatic, Mom. I'm only trying to make life easier for both of us." "Easier for whom?" I asked quietly. She froze, her back to me. Her shoulders rose and fell with a long breath. Then she grabbed her purse from the counter and clutched it tightly. Without another word, she moved toward the door. I watched her go. Her perfume trailed after her, long after the click of her heels had faded. The lilies remained, their scent too sharp for the small space, overwhelming the warm smell of bread and tea. I sat alone, the brooch cool beneath my fingers. Inside me, emotions tangled. She was my daughter. I remembered her running barefoot through the grass as a child, her laughter free of calculation, her small hand gripping mine at the county fair. Those memories still lived in me, tender and real. But now she stood cloaked in illusions, unable or unwilling to face the truth of who she had become. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The room was still, yet her absence was louder than her presence had been. My heart ached, not only for myself, but for the part of her that had been lost to fear, to pride, to the obsession with appearing perfect. The lilies leaned in their vase, white petals glowing against the dim light of my kitchen. They looked pure, but their scent was suffocating. They were like Rachel's smile, flawless, but impossible to breathe near for long. I whispered into the silence, "A mirror does not lie, Rachel. Not for me. Not for you. I sipped my tea. Its taste was sharp, grounding, honest, and in that moment I understood that while lies could fill a room, truth only needed a whisper to endure. Linda had a way of knocking that never startled me. 3 soft taps, a pause, then one more, like a rhythm only neighbors who had lived side by side for decades would recognize. That evening, as dusk painted the sky a bruised purple, I opened the door and found her standing there with a basket of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. Her gray hair was pinned loosely, and her smile carried both warmth and quiet worry. "Evening, Kate," she said. "Thought you might like company." I let her in. The house smelled faintly of tea and rain-soaked wood. She set the basket on the counter, then moved toward the table as though she belonged here, and in many ways she did. Sometimes the closest family is the one that does not share blood. We sat across from each other, cups of tea steaming between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was not heavy. It was companionable, the kind that lets you breathe. She watched me with patient eyes, the kind that had weathered her own storms. Finally, she said softly, "You've been carrying something heavy again. I can see it in the way your shoulders sit." I traced the rim of my cup with a finger. "Rachel came yesterday, brought flowers, words dipped in sugar, but underneath, I could taste the bitterness." Linda leaned forward. "She wants to protect her image more than she wants to protect you." I nodded. "She told me she only wants people to think she's a good daughter. I told her mirrors don't lie. She left, but the scent of her perfume is still in my kitchen. I can't shake it." Linda reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. Her skin was warm, her grip steady. "You are not alone in this. What's happening to you, Kate, has happened to more of us than people want to admit." I lifted my eyes to her, searching. "What do you mean?" She drew a long breath, as though the memory itself had weight. "My son, Daniel. Years ago, he went to a bank, said he needed a loan to renovate his business. He told them it was to take care of me. He signed papers in my name. For months I didn't know. Letters arrived, debts I never created. By the time I found out, I was already tangled in it. I ended up paying thousands I didn't owe. All the while he told people he was supporting me." Her voice shook slightly, but she steadied it. He stood in front of friends and said, "I make sure my mother wants for nothing." Meanwhile, I was working double shifts at the diner, trying to clean up the mess he left behind. I felt my breath catch. "Linda," she shook her head, eyes clear but glistening. "Don't pity me. Just understand. What you're facing isn't just a family spat. It's a pattern. Too many of us, when we grow old, are used like props in someone else's show. We're paraded around as proof of their goodness, while behind the curtain, they're bleeding us dry." Her words struck something raw in me. The papers Rachel had sent. The $7,000 lie scrawled in official ink. Gregory's smooth warning in the kitchen, hinting at my supposed frailty. And now Linda's story, nearly a mirror to mine. "It isn't just me," I whispered. "No," Linda said firmly, "it's not just you. And if you let them write your story, Kate, they'll keep writing it until there's nothing left of you." The kettle whistled again, a sharp reminder that time was moving whether I wanted it to or not. I poured more tea, the bergamot filling the air, mingling with the faint scent of cornbread. Linda sipped her tea, then fixed me with a steady gaze. "You need to write everything down. Every word, every bill, every document. Don't trust memory alone. That's the weapon they use. They say we forget. But paper doesn't forget. Ink does not falter." Her words echoed Ethan's advice, but hearing them from Linda, a woman who had lived through her own betrayal, carried a different weight. I touched the brooch at my chest, its silver cold against my skin. "Thomas's promise. My promise now. Promise." "I've started," I said quietly. "I've written dates, amounts, words," she said, "but sometimes I feel as though my pages are too small for the weight of what's happening." Linda smiled sadly. "Keep writing. One day those pages will be your shield." The clock ticked steadily in the corner. I looked around my little kitchen, the worn curtains, the chipped plates, the quiet walls that had heard every sigh of mine. I had thought my suffering was mine alone, a private shadow. But now I understood it was bigger, stretching across households, hidden behind closed doors. Linda leaned back, her eyes softening. Don't let shame keep you quiet. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. And the more of us who speak, the harder it will be for them to keep pretending. I nodded, my throat tight. They dressed me up in lies, Linda. They painted me as dependent, helpless, while I bled my hands on real work. And people believed them. She squeezed my hand again. That's the way of lies. They shine brighter than truth at first. But truth endures, Kate. And you, your life, your words, you're stronger than they think. When she finally left, the house felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. The lilies Rachel had left still stood on the counter, their perfume sharp, clashing with the sweet scent of Linda's cornbread. One bouquet, polished and perfect, suffocating in its falseness. The other, humble and warm, carrying comfort. I sat back at the table, journal open, pen ready. On the page I wrote, "This is not just my fight. This shadow stretches across many, and truth is the only light strong enough to break it." The words looked small, but they were steady, and I promised myself that night, as rain tapped gently against the window, that I would keep writing. For myself, for Linda, for every voice twisted into silence. I woke the next morning with a clarity I had not felt in years. The house was quiet, the light filtering pale and thin through the curtains, yet something inside me had shifted. I sat at the kitchen table, tea steeping slowly in my cup, and laid my hand over the silver brooch pinned to my cardigan. The metal was cool at first, then warm beneath my palm. In that stillness, I could almost hear Thomas's voice. "Do not fear the light, Kate. Step into it." So I began. The first step was my journal. What had once been a place for memories, prayers, and the ache of widowhood now became a ledger of truth. I wrote in firm strokes, careful and deliberate, recording not only how I felt, but what I knew. Dates, times, words spoken. Each page became less of a diary and more of a record, something that could not be twisted by anyone else's tongue. At the top of one page I wrote, "Legal Journal." Beneath it, the first entry, November 30th. Received tax documents from Rachel, listed as dependent. Allowance of $7,000 monthly. No funds received, photographed and stored. The pen scratched against paper, steady and strong. It felt different than before, less like reflection, more like testimony. The second step was my phone. I purchased a small recorder shaped like a keychain, something discreet enough to slip into my purse. The first time I clicked it on, I felt my heart hammer, but also a grim determination. Every word spoken to me could now live beyond memory. No one could dismiss it as confusion. No one could say I imagined it. The recorder did not lie. I tested it by calling Rachel. "I'm looking at the documents you sent," I said, voice calm. She laughed lightly, almost too quickly. "Mom, it's just paperwork. You don't need to worry. It's all taken care of. Everyone knows we give you $7,000 a month." My thumb pressed against the recorder in my lap. Her voice, her words, her lie, all captured. When the call ended, I sat back in my chair, the sound of my own breathing loud in the room. A small victory, but it was proof. The third step was my email. I created a folder and labeled it Evidence. Every message from Rachel, every attachment, every word that could become a thread of the larger fabric, I stored there. I printed copies too, tucking them into a binder that grew heavier by the day. With each sheet I added, I felt my spine straighten a little more. There was a rhythm to it. In the mornings, tea and journal. In the afternoons, sorting bills, clipping them together with notes in the margins. In the evenings, checking email, filing, labeling. My small kitchen table transformed into a command post covered with papers, binders, and pens. Sometimes doubt crept in. Late at night, when the house was too quiet, I would wonder, what if this is useless? What if they crush me anyway with their money, their influence? But then I would touch the brooch, cold and steady, and the doubt would shrink back. One evening, Linda stopped by and saw the piles of papers. "Kate," she said, lifting a binder, "you're building a fortress." "A fortress of paper," I replied, half smiling, "but strong enough, I hope, to keep the truth safe." She nodded. "Brick by brick, page by page. That's how you win against people who think you're powerless." I thought about that long after she left. My fortress was small, unassuming, built not of stone, but of receipts and ink. Yet I felt its walls rising around me, stronger with each entry in my journal, each recording stored, each email printed. The change was not only in my home, but in me. I carried myself differently. When Rachel called again, her voice dripping with honey, I answered with a calm I hadn't known before. "Yes, Rachel," I said, letting her words wash over me while my thumb clicked the recorder. Her compliments, her small lies, her careful weaving of appearances, they all became evidence. I began to notice more. The way Gregory phrased things, always with subtle threats disguised as concern. "People might think you're confused, Catherine," he had said once. Now I understood. He was planting seeds, hoping to paint me as fragile, unstable. I wrote it all down. Some days were exhausting. Sorting through bills, typing notes, replaying recordings drained me. But the exhaustion felt purposeful. It was not the weary grind of working 3 jobs just to keep afloat. This was the steady fatigue of building something, of creating a shield for myself. At night, when I finally closed the binder and set down my pen, I would sit in the quiet and breathe deeply. The house smelled of paper, ink, and tea leaves. The rain often returned, tapping softly against the window, and each night I whispered the same words before bed: "You will not erase me." There was strength in routine. There was courage in detail. I had lived too long believing silence was survival. Now I saw it clearly. Silence was surrender. The light was harsh, but it was mine to step into. One afternoon, I sat at the table with the brooch in my palm, its silver catching the sun. I whispered aloud, as though Thomas could hear, "Don't fear the light, Kate." My own voice answered back inside me, stronger than his memory now. "I don't." The fortress was still growing. It was not yet enough to topple their lies, but it was enough to steady me, enough to remind me that I was not powerless, no matter how carefully Rachel and Gregory tried to dress me as fragile. And as I closed the journal that evening, ink still drying on the page, I knew with certainty, when the time came, my words and my evidence would speak louder than their wealth ever could. Ethan spread the papers across his dining room table, his glasses sliding low on his nose as he scanned each line. I sat opposite him, my hands tight around the handle of my teacup, though the tea had already gone cold. The hum of his old refrigerator filled the silence, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air. "Kate," he said finally, his voice heavy, "I traced it. The money was never meant for you." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" He tapped the page with his pen. "The allowance your daughter claimed to give you, $7,000 a month, wasn't deposited into your account. It never touched your hands. It went straight into a holding company, Stanton Heritage LLC. The name chilled me. "Stanton," I whispered. "That's Gregory's family name." Ethan nodded grimly. "Exactly. A shell company. Clean on paper, but only if no one looks too closely. From there, the funds were funneled into a real estate purchase. A penthouse, uptown Dallas." I felt my stomach drop. Images crowded my mind. Rachel smiling in glittering dresses, Gregory boasting about their perfect life, their guests nodding in admiration. That penthouse wasn't just a home, it was a trophy, a monument to wealth they had stolen in my name. I pressed the brooch beneath my cardigan as though the silver could steady me. So the allowance, it was never about me at all. Ethan leaned back, sighing. "No. It was never about supporting you. It was about creating a believable story. On tax forms, they appear as the doting children, giving their aging mother a generous stipend. To the government, they look noble, charitable. In reality, they're laundering money through your identity, hiding purchases that would raise eyebrows if anyone traced them directly. His words cut deeper than I expected. Elder financial abuse, that was cruel enough. But this was using me as camouflage, turning me into the mask they wore to conceal greed, I whispered, half to myself. They dressed me up as the perfect dependent, while they bought themselves a palace. Ethan's eyes softened, but his tone stayed firm. It's worse than a palace, Kate. It's fraud built on your name. If the government investigates, it won't just be them under the microscope. You'll be tangled in it. That's why they wrote you as dependent. If questioned, they can claim you knew, that you agreed. It shields them, but it endangers you. I sat frozen, my breath shallow. They built their house of glass with my blood. Ethan didn't flinch. That's the truth. And you need to protect yourself. Every document you've kept, every recording, you'll need them all. Because when this comes to light, they'll fight to push the blame on you. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence press down. In the dark behind my eyelids, I saw Rachel as a little girl, tugging at my sleeve, asking me to braid her hair. I saw Gregory, years later, standing tall and smug in his tailored suit, thanking me for letting them take care of me. I had believed then it was arrogance. Now I knew it was strategy. My voice shook but did not break. Allowance was nothing more than a costume, a disguise for a trail of money they couldn't explain. They used me as the stage prop, smiling at Thanksgiving, claiming I lived on their generosity, while behind the curtain they bought themselves luxury in my name. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You see clearly now. Don't lose that clarity. But remember, don't confront them directly yet. They'll only twist it, say you misunderstood, say you're confused. That's how abusers work. You need undeniable proof. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his warning. So, I keep building my fortress? Yes, he said. And when the time is right, the fortress will stand on its own. I touched the brooch again, its edge pressing into my palm. In that moment, Thomas's voice rose in memory, firm and steady. Don't fear the light, Kate, I whispered aloud. I don't. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of Ethan's clock. Outside, the sun slipped lower, throwing long shadows across the stacks of paper on the table. I studied them, page after page, each one evidence not only of lies, but of theft. They thought they could hide behind numbers and corporate names, that their wealth would shield them. They had forgotten that numbers leave trails, trails that can be followed, trails that burn when exposed to light. I stood, gathering the papers back into my folder. My hands no longer trembled. Instead, they were steady, firm, as though the weight of truth itself had settled into my grip. Ethan walked me to the door. Kate, he said softly, I know this is heavy, but you are not alone. Remember that. I met his eyes, nodding once. I know, and I won't let them bury me under their lies. When I stepped outside, the evening air was sharp, cool against my skin. The street smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. I walked slowly, clutching the folder to my chest. Above, the first stars pierced through the fading light. They reminded me of the truth. Small points, but unshakable, unchangeable, no matter how dark the sky became. As I reached my house, I whispered again, steady and certain. Allowance was only the mask, and now I know what it hides. The evening glowed with chandeliers and polished silver, a smaller gathering than Thanksgiving, but no less calculated. Gregory loved these nights. His house in Dallas was the perfect stage. Crystal glasses chimed, soft jazz hummed beneath conversation, and the air smelled of roasted lamb glazed with rosemary. Guests murmured politely, their laughter rising and falling in well-timed waves. I sat near the center of the room, the hum of voices circling me. Rachel floated between groups of guests, her dress a sheen of emerald silk, her laughter carefully measured. Gregory stood tall near the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other cradling a glass of red wine. His voice carried easily, steady and proud. "You know," he said, his eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on me, "we always give Mom $7,000 a month. She never has to worry. It's our way of making sure she lives comfortably." A ripple of admiration passed through the room. Heads nodded, eyes softened, hands patted Gregory's back. To them, he was the picture of filial duty, a wealthy man cloaking himself in generosity. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the weight of lies pressing down. My hand brushed the brooch at my chest, the silver cool and grounding. I rose slowly from my chair. The silk of conversation tore around me, leaving a quiet gap. Eyes turned. I held my leather-bound journal in one hand, a folded set of papers in the other. My voice came steady, sharper than the clink of glass. "I do not receive that money." The room stilled. A fork dropped softly against a plate. Rachel's smile froze, then faltered. Gregory's jaw tightened, though he forced a chuckle. I unfolded the papers with deliberate calm and held them up. "But I do know where it goes. Not to me, to Stanton Heritage LLC. And from there, to a penthouse in uptown Dallas." The silence that followed was not polite. It was suffocating. Guests stared, some with disbelief, others with dawning recognition. The jazz record hissed faintly in the background, a sound too fragile for the tension that now filled the room. Rachel's hand shook as she set her glass down, her face drained of color. "Mom," she whispered, "why are you saying this here?" I looked directly at her, my words cutting but calm. "Because here is where the lie was told." Gregory stepped forward, his smile a brittle mask. "Now, Catherine," he said smoothly, "surely you've misunderstood. These matters are complicated. Numbers, transfers, accounts, you know how confusing it can be." I opened the journal, its pages lined with dates, conversations, copies of bills, notes in my hand. Confusion fades when the evidence is clear. My lights, my water, my rent. These bills are paid by my work, not your generosity. And this, I lifted the papers higher, this is not confusion. This is fact. The guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman glanced toward her husband, whispering behind a manicured hand. A man cleared his throat, his eyes darting from Gregory to me. Rachel whispered again, her voice trembling. "Mom, please, you're making a scene." I met her gaze. For a moment, I saw not the woman in silk, but the girl I had once braided hair for, the girl who used to leave drawings on the fridge. My heart ached, but my voice did not waver. Truth is not a scene. Truth is a mirror, and tonight it is reflecting you. Gregory's composure cracked. His smile fell, his eyes darkened, his tone sharpened. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said coldly. "You're hurting Rachel. You're hurting this family." I held the brooch tightly, its edge pressing into my palm until it stung. "No, Gregory, I'm protecting myself. And perhaps, by speaking now, I'm protecting others too." The silence thickened. No one clapped this time. No one congratulated them for their supposed generosity. The applause that once cushioned their lies had turned into the weight of suspicion pressing against them. I saw it in their eyes. The guests who had smiled so easily a moment ago now studied Rachel and Gregory with doubt. Wealth could dress a lie, but it could not silence truth when spoken plainly, calmly, undeniably. I closed my journal, folded the papers, and tucked them back under my arm. My voice dropped softer, but sharper still. A penthouse built on deception will never be a home. It will always be a monument to fraud. Rachel's breath hitched. Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Gregory's face hardened into stone. I turned back to my chair, sat down slowly, and lifted my tea to my lips. The taste was bitter but grounding. Around me, conversations resumed in hushed tones, stripped of the easy laughter from before. Guests no longer looked at me with pity. They looked at Gregory and Rachel with unease. I had not shouted. I had not wept. I had not begged. I had simply laid the truth bare, and the truth had done the work for me. That night, as I left their house, the cool Dallas air hit my face, crisp and clean. I breathed deeply, steady and sure. Inside, the chandeliers still glowed, but their light seemed weaker, dimmer. For the first time, I felt no weight pressing down on me. Gregory asked to see me after the guests had left. The house, once full of chatter and clinking glasses, had gone quiet. Only the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint ticking of a wall clock filled the silence. He led me into his study, a room lined with leather-bound books and heavy curtains that shut out the night. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and polish, as though power itself had soaked into the wood. He closed the door behind us and turned to face me. His smile, that polished smile he wore like armor, had vanished. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark. "Do you have any idea what you've done tonight?" he asked, his voice low but vibrating with tension. I stood still, my fingers brushing against the silver brooch beneath my cardigan. "I told the truth." He let out a sharp laugh, one without humor. "The truth? You think the truth is some shining sword you can wave around? The Stanton family has spent generations building an image of wealth, of stability. Do you know what that means for me? Every deal I've made, every board I've sat on, it's all been under the expectation that we do not falter, not even once. And you—" His voice rose, then dropped again to a hiss. "With a few words, you've put cracks in the image I've bled to protect." I watched him carefully. The mask of the charming host was gone. What stood before me now was a man stripped of pretense, his desperation gleaming like a blade. "I've worked my entire life," he continued, pacing slowly, his hands clenched. "Not just for money, but for respect. For a place at the table where men look you in the eye as an equal. One slip, one whisper, and it all collapses. Do you understand what you've risked for me?" I held his gaze. My voice came calm, unshaken. "Respect cannot be bought with lies. It cannot be propped up with fraud. It is earned, Gregory, and you have not earned it." His eyes flashed, a spark of fury breaking through. For the first time, I saw the cruelty he kept hidden beneath his tailored suits and polite greetings. His lips curled slightly, not into a smile but into something sharper. "You old fool," he said quietly. "Do you think anyone cares about the details? They care about appearances. That's what keeps doors open. That's what makes the world spin. And you—" he pointed a finger at me, trembling with rage. "You would rather drag us all into the mud than play your part." I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear, with clarity. "You've mistaken me, Gregory. I am not your prop. I am not a piece of your theater. I am a woman who has worked for every dime she has ever touched, and if your empire requires me to lie, then it deserves to crumble." For a moment his face twisted. His hands, once steady, now flexed as though he wanted to strike the air between us. The room felt smaller, the shadows deeper, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to witness the unmasking. His voice dropped to a growl. "Do you know how hard I've had to fight to prove myself to the Stantons? I married Rachel not just for love, but for survival. Her father doubted me from the beginning. I built and schemed and proved myself worthy. And you think I'll let you, with your bills and your righteous indignation, undo it all?" I stood taller, pressing the brooch until its edge stung my palm. "If your worth depends on a lie, Gregory, then it was never worth anything at all." His breath came fast, his composure shattered. I saw in that moment the man behind the charm, the fear, the hunger, the ruthlessness. He had built his life on a foundation of deceit, and my words had struck at the cracks. We stood in silence for a long moment. The air was thick, charged. I felt the weight of what had passed between us settle deep inside me. It was not just a battle of words, it was a revelation of character. Finally, he stepped back, straightened his jacket, and forced a thin smile. "You think you're clever. You think a few words and some scribbled notes can bring me down. But remember this, Catherine. Power does not bend to truth. It bends truth to itself." I turned toward the door, my voice steady. "Then you've already lost. Because power built on lies always falls when the mirror shatters." His eyes burned as I left the study. I walked down the hall, past the dimmed chandeliers and the empty glasses. The house, so polished on the surface, now felt like a shell of illusions. Outside, the night air was sharp, clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating study. I breathed deeply, the stars glittering above like silent witnesses. My heart was steady. I had seen Gregory's true face, the one hidden beneath charm and wealth, and I knew with a clarity that left no room for fear that truth had already begun to unravel him. Rachel came to me the next morning. Her knock was hesitant, softer than usual, almost like a child's. When I opened the door, she stood there without her usual armor. No emerald silk, no polished smile. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup smudged at the corners. She clutched a silk scarf in her hands, twisting it as though it might hold her together. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, can we talk?" I let her in. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toasted bread. She sat at the table where my journals and folders still lay in a neat stack. Her eyes lingered on them, and I could see the fear behind her tears. Then she broke. Her shoulders shook as sobs escaped, raw and loud in the small room. She pressed the scarf to her face. "I can't take it," she cried. "I can't stand people thinking I'm ungrateful. I just wanted them to admire me, to see me as the perfect daughter." Her words pierced me, not because they revealed remorse, but because of what they did not say. She did not cry for the nights I worked until my hands ached. She did not weep for the bills that left me sleepless. She cried because her reflection in the world's eyes had cracked. I sat across from her, my hands folded around my cup of tea. The steam curled upward, fragrant with bergamot, calm against her storm. My chest ached as I watched her unravel. She was my child, my Rachel. I had held her through fevers, through heartbreaks, through fear of thunder as a girl. And yet here she sat, a woman grown, grieving not for me, but for her own pride. When her sobs softened into shaky breaths, I spoke, my voice steady. "Rachel, you are not weeping because I suffered. You are weeping because the mask slipped. Do you understand that?" Her head jerked up, eyes red. "That's not fair." "It is the truth," I interrupted gently. "And the truth is never cruel, Rachel. Lies are cruel. Lies are what you built your image on. You didn't worry about me paying rent with diner tips. You worried about how others would see you if they knew." Her lips trembled. She clutched the scarf tighter. "I just wanted to be admired, Mom, to feel like I was enough." My heart squeezed. I could see the child in her still, the little girl who once brought me a wilted daisy and whispered, "Am I pretty enough, Mama?" That ache, that hunger for validation had never left her. It had grown claws, dressed itself in silk and jewels, but at its core, it was the same fragile need. "Rachel," I said quietly, "admiration built on lies is a house of glass. It will always shatter when touched. Respect cannot be bought, and it cannot be staged. It is earned in silence, in truth, in how we treat those who can give us nothing." Her tears slowed, but her gaze hardened. "So what do I do now? Everyone knows. They'll whisper. They'll judge me." I leaned closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "Then let them whisper. Better to be whispered about for facing the truth than to be praised for living a lie." She looked away, staring at the lilies she had left days before. Their petals had begun to curl at the edges, their once sharp scent fading into something bitter. She reached out as if to straighten them, but pulled her hand back quickly, as though even flowers might reject her touch. I thought of Thomas then, how he used to say, "When pride and fear rule a person, they will mistake love for betrayal." I could see it now in Rachel's eyes. She thought my truth had betrayed her. In reality, it was the only love left I could give her, the love that refused to let her drown in illusions. "Mom," she whispered again, "I don't want to be seen as ungrateful." I sighed softly, my hand pressing against the cool brooch at my chest. "Then be grateful, Rachel. Not in speeches, not in staged dinners, but in the quiet. Gratitude is not what people see, it's what you live." Her chin quivered. For a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding, but it vanished quickly, smothered by fear. She stood abruptly, wiping her eyes with the scarf. "I can't—" Her voice broke again. "I can't be small, Mom. I can't be ordinary. People have to believe—" She trailed off, unable to finish. I remained seated, calm, watching her storm rage and then falter. "Rachel," I said, my voice low but unyielding, "the higher you climb on lies, the harder the fall. You fear shame, but shame is not the enemy. The enemy is refusing to change." She turned to me, her eyes glistening, lips pressed tight. "Do you hate me?" My chest ached. "No," I whispered. "I don't hate you. I hurt for you. Because you don't see that what you crave most, respect, love, admiration, cannot live in the same house as deceit." The silence between us was heavy. She clutched her purse, trembling. Then she turned and walked to the door. As she opened it, the fading lilies on the counter released their bitter perfume, mingling with her expensive fragrance. 2 scents, both fading, both unable to last. When the door closed behind her, I sat back, tea cooling in my hands. The ache in my chest remained, but beneath it was a steady calm. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had spoken truth, and truth had cut where it needed to. Through the window, I watched her car pull away. Her taillights glowed red against the darkening street, fading into the distance. My heart whispered the words she could not yet hear. A mother's love does not mean silence. Sometimes love is the mirror that shows us who we've become. I pressed the brooch, feeling its cold certainty. Rachel's tears had been real, but they were for herself, not for me. And I knew then, with clarity sharp as glass, that my fight was never against her sorrow. It was against the chains of illusion she clung to so desperately. I did not storm into a courtroom. I did not hire lawyers to battle fire with fire. My fight was not with gavels or subpoenas. My weapon was quieter, sharper, and far more patient. Truth itself. One cold morning, I packed everything into a simple manila envelope. The binder of receipts, the copied emails, the recordings transcribed word for word. At the top, I placed the tax forms with my name twisted into a falsehood. I walked through downtown Austin, the chill wind biting my cheeks, until I reached the small office of a local newspaper. The building was modest, brick walls lined with faded posters of past headlines. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink and old paper. I asked to see a journalist whose articles I had read for years. Her name was Susan Hayes. She was not the kind who chased glamour or politics. She wrote stories about ordinary people and the hidden truths in their lives. When she sat down across from me, her eyes were steady, her notebook open, her pen poised. I slid the envelope across the table. My hands did not shake. "Everything you need is in there," I told her. "Read it. Follow the trail. The truth is all there." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. "Why are you giving this to me, Mrs. Stanton? Why not keep it for yourself, or go to the authorities?" I took a slow breath, pressing the brooch beneath my cardigan. Because courtrooms can be twisted, lawyers can bury voices, but once truth reaches the public, it belongs to everyone. It cannot be hidden again. Her pen scratched across the page. She nodded once, firm. "I'll dig into this, carefully." I rose to leave. At the door, she called softly after me, "This story will change things." I didn't answer. Some truths don't need answers. They simply stand on their own. Weeks passed. I went on with my routines, tea at dawn, journal entries by lamplight, tending my roses after the rain. Life carried its usual weight, but beneath it was a quiet anticipation, like the hush before a storm breaks. Then, one crisp Sunday morning, the paper landed on my doorstep with a heavy thud. I bent slowly, the air cool in my lungs, and lifted it. The headline stretched across the front page. "Billionaire Families' $7,000 a Month Lie." I carried it inside, laid it on the table, and read. Every word had been sharpened with care. Susan had traced the allowance money from Gregory's accounts through Stanton Heritage LLC and into the Uptown penthouse. She described the tax fraud, the abuse of my name, the public facade. My own voice appeared only briefly, quoted from our conversations. Respect cannot be bought with lies. A mirror does not lie, no matter how polished the smile. The city buzzed, phones rang, social media lit up with outrage. Rachel and Gregory's names spread not with admiration, but with suspicion. Their pictures, once framed in praise, now bore captions of scandal. Business partners began to distance themselves. Invitations dried up. Doors that had always opened for them now shut quietly in their faces. I did not gloat. I did not call anyone to say, "I told you so." I sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, the steam rising in gentle curls. The lilies Rachel had left had long since withered, their stems brittle, their perfume faded into nothing. On the counter, Linda's cornbread basket still sat, empty but warm with memory. 2 gifts, 2 truths, 1 false, 1 real. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. Rachel's voice spilled out, broken, frantic, pleading for me to fix what had been undone. I closed my eyes, listening but unmoved. She cried for her image, not for the damage she had caused. Gregory's message came later, colder. He accused me of betrayal, of destroying his life's work. I let the words pass over me like smoke. Lies lose their grip when truth has already burned through. I sat back, touching the silver brooch. Thomas's promise. My anchor. I whispered to the empty room. I did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I only stepped out of the shadows. The quiet in the house felt different that day, not heavy, not suffocating. It was clean, like air after rain. The truth had spoken, not through my shouting, not through revenge, but through the steady light of exposure. I looked out the window at my roses, their petals trembling in the breeze. They had survived storms, cold nights, and scorching summers, and still they bloomed. That was the image I wanted to leave behind, not wealth or pretense, but endurance. If anyone asked me later why I chose not to sue, not to fight in court, I would only say this: because silence can be dignity if it follows truth. And sometimes the greatest victory is letting lies collapse under their own weight. The morning began, as it always had, with the quiet whistle of the kettle and the familiar weight of the porcelain teacup in my hand. The air carried the fresh scent of dew, mingling with the sweetness of the roses outside. I stood at the window, steam rising gently from the cup, and let my gaze rest on the garden Thomas and I had once planted together. The roses glistened with drops of water, their petals open, reaching toward the sun. I set the tea down and opened my journal. The leather cover was worn, the pages heavy with ink and memory. Today I wrote slowly, carefully, the pen gliding across the paper. The silence I once kept was a prison. Today, it is no longer mine to carry. The truth speaks for itself, and I am free. The brooch at my chest caught the morning light. I pressed it lightly with my fingertips, as though to feel Thomas's steady presence one last time. In that touch, there was both grief and strength, a reminder of promises kept and battles endured. A knock sounded at the door, 3 soft taps, a pause, then one more. Linda's rhythm. I opened the door to find her standing there with a basket, the smell of warm bread spilling into the air. She smiled, her eyes kind but knowing. "Good morning, Kate," she said, stepping inside. "I thought you might want something fresh out of the oven." We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming across the wood. She set the basket between us, its cloth folded neatly, steam rising from the loaf. She looked at me for a moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "You did what many of us only dream of doing. You stood up. You spoke, when silence would have been easier. You showed them what truth looks like." Her words settled over me like a soft blanket. I sipped my tea, its warmth grounding me, and let out a slow breath. "Linda," I said, "I did not defeat them. I only defeated the silence inside me. Her eyes softened further. Sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. We ate in comfortable quiet, the bread rich and sweet against the bitterness of tea. The sounds of the morning drifted in, the chirping of sparrows, the rustle of leaves, the faint bark of a dog down the street. Ordinary sounds, but they carried a kind of music I had not truly heard in years. Rachel's face lingered in my mind, tearful and desperate, clinging to a reflection that had already shattered. Gregory's voice echoed too, sharp with rage, stripped of its charm. They had shown their true selves to the world. Their downfall was not my doing alone. It was the weight of their lies, finally collapsing under their own arrogance. I felt no triumph in their ruin. What I felt instead was clarity. The truth had not been mine to twist or to hide. It had only been mine to release. And once released, it had done its work, cutting quietly, leaving no room for disguise. Linda reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "Kate," she said softly, "you've given others hope. Those who feel small, who feel erased. Your voice is theirs now too." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words sink deep. Hope. That was what had been missing in the nights I worked long hours, in the days when I carried bills heavier than groceries. Hope was what silence had stolen. Now, hope had returned, not as applause or recognition, but as stillness within me. I rose and walked to the garden. Linda followed, her footsteps soft on the grass. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, their petals glowing under the morning sun. I touched one bloom lightly, its softness delicate, its thorns sharp beneath, strength and fragility side by side, inseparable. "Thomas used to say," I murmured, "that roses survive because they carry both beauty and defense. Without one, the other cannot last." Linda smiled, her eyes glistening in the light. "And you, Kate, you've shown both." I turned toward her, the sun catching the silver in my hair, the brooch at my chest shining faintly. "No, I've only remembered what was always there. It took losing silence to find it." We stood quietly as the sun climbed higher, its light spilling golden across the garden. The roses seemed to glow from within, their edges lined with fire. In that light, there was no need for words, no need for explanation. As Linda left, basket empty, I returned to my desk. I opened the journal to a fresh page and wrote, "I do not wish for revenge, nor for pity. I wish only for peace, and for the truth to live longer than lies." I closed the journal, set down the pen, and returned to the window. The sun poured across the roses, each petal illuminated, each shadow cut clean. My chest rose with a deep, steady breath. For the first time in years, I felt not like a dependent, not like a prop in someone else's story, but like a woman who had chosen her own ending. Quiet, resolute, unshaken. I touched the brooch once more and whispered to the morning. I did not win against them. I won against the silence in me. And as the sunlight fell across the roses, the garden glowed with quiet defiance, soft yet unyielding. The scene closed not with noise, but with grace, high, steady, and unbreakable.